Nikki. How are you? Trying to make sure everything is working. Let's see if I can get this working. So, here we go. So, we are live. Well, I'm live, rather. I'm talking about we live. I'm live on Facebook, YouTube, and Periscope. So, here we go. Thank you for sharing that out. I appreciate it. So one of the things that I was going to go over today, if anybody's watching this on the replay or on Facebook, I'm Jewel. Most of you all know me on Facebook, my friends and family. And I am a tutor. I'm a homeschooler. I used to homeschool my kids now. They're doing regular school now, but I'm also a tutor. And one of the most frustrating topics I have seen a lot of my students deal with is fractions. Nobody likes fractions. They think fractions are hard, fractions are difficult. They're not that bad. As long as you figure out what to do, how to do the fractions, how to manipulate them, you'll be good to go. That's the main problem. Is when people see fractions, they get a little confused, they get a little frustrated, but it's not as hard as it looks. So one of the things that I was helping one of my students with was adding fractions with unlike denominators. This topic right here is very frustrating for some of them, and it's not that difficult. When you're adding fractions, adding or subtracting fractions, let me see something. I just saw something pop on my screen right here. When you're adding or subtracting fractions, in order to add or subtract them, they must have the same denominator. You cannot add or subtract a fraction if their denominator is not the same. Back in the day when I was in school, when I was in elementary school, we talked about the LCD, which is the least common denominator. The LCD, okay? And so what happens, you do have to find the least common denominator, and there's a couple of ways to do this. When you look at your numbers in the denominator, we used to do something where you would multiply them both together, and that would be your least common denominator. But sometimes that's not it. Sometimes you have to go about it a different way. The one thing I want to tell people about fractions, you must know your multiplication facts. We used to call them timetables back in the day, you know what I mean? So you must know your multiplication facts. If you don't, when it comes to adding fractions with unlike denominators, you're going to have a problem. You're going to have an issue. The best way to find the least common denominator is to find the multiple. When you're doing the multiples of the numbers, the multiples are usually those numbers that is the answer to the factors. The factors, and if you're doing multiplication, you know that the factors, to find the least common the numbers, the least common denominator is to find the multiple. When you multiply of the numbers, the multiples are usually those numbers that to reach it's the answer to the factors. The factors, the answer. And if you're doing multiplication, you know that in multiplication, the answer is also known as the product. Okay? The numbers, the multiples. You multiply. That's the actual answer itself. The product, which is also the answer. In multiplication, so for instance, for the number 2, the multiples of 2. Remember when we used to skip count back in the day, that we used to call it counting by 2s, counting by 5s. Now they call it skip counting. So for instance, if you have the number 2, it's just counting by 2. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. You can keep on going, okay? But that's also the multiples of 2, because 2 times 1 is 2. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 3 is 6, and so on, okay? So then, if you have the number 5, the multiples of 5. Think about 5 and your 5 timetables. Hey, Stephanie, how you doing? Think about your 5s. 5 times 1 is 5. 5 times 2 is 10. 5 times 3 is 15, and you just keep going on and on. Again, you can refer to it as skip counting by 5, or you can think about it as when you're doing your multiplication facts. So you have to find the least common denominator. So you look at these two numbers here, you look at this set of numbers, and you see which number is the least, the smallest number that they have in common, and that is the number 10. You can refer to it as skip counting by 5, or you can think about that's the number 10. So that is the number that we have to turn our denominator into so that we can add the fractions and get the answer. So in order to turn our denominators into the number 10, we have to do multiplication, okay? So usually what I have my students do, I have them write it over. That's the number 10. So that is the number. So then you look at the denominator, and if you know your multiplication facts, what number do you have to multiply 5 by to make it 10? We have to do multiplication, okay? You're going to have to multiply the 5 by 2 to turn it into 10. You have to mute your devices. I have an echo. Okay, hold on. So then you look at the denominator. And if you it must be coming from my phone. What number do you have to multiply 5 by? I hope that's better. 10. You're gonna have to multiply the 5. So let me know if it's to turn it into 10. Still not good. Nikki, let me know. So, in order to turn the 10, the 5 into the 10, you have to multiply it by 2. Whatever you do to the denominator, you must do to the numerator. That's how fractions work. And vice versa. Whatever you do to the numerator, you must do to the denominator. Okay? So, here we go. So, we're going to multiply the 5 times 2. That gives us a new denominator of 10. We do the same thing to the numerator. 2 times 2. 2 times 5. No, that's right. 2 times 2. I'm sorry. Whatever you do to the denominator, you do to the numerator. 2 times 2 is 4. So, now we go over here. So, we have to do the same thing. So, what do we have to do now to turn this 2 into a 10? Sorry, somebody just sent me a message and it just popped up and kind of distracted me. So in order to make this, hello Gail, how are you? To make this a 10, we're going to have to multiply this 2 by 5. Whatever you do, the denominator, you do to the numerator. This is the same thing when you're doing pre-algebra. It's the same thing when you're reducing fractions, when you're making equivalent fractions, okay? So now we're going to do the same thing. 3 times 5 is 15. To make this a 10, we're going to have to and then 2 times 5 is 10. Whatever you do, the denominator. So now that both of our fractions have the same denominator, now we can go ahead and now we can add them together. So of course 4 plus 15 is 19. And then you just keep the denominator the same, leave it as 10. Now, in a case like this, this is known as an improper fraction. I didn't know this was going to be an improper fraction, but no problem. An improper fraction is when the number on the bottom is lower than the number on the top. The denominator is lower than the numerator. And in this case, you usually can't leave it like that. You usually have to make it into a mixed fraction. The mixed fraction is where you have a whole number, a numerator, and a denominator. So, what you do in this case, you have to divide it. Let me move this up. The denominator is lower. Hopefully I have enough space. And in this case, you usually can't. When you're dividing it, you usually have to make it. The denominator becomes your divisor right here, and your numerator becomes your dividend. So then you do your division. How many times can 10 go into 19? Can only go into 19 once. Then we do our multiplication. 1 times 10 is 10. Then we subtract. 9 minus 0 is 9. Instead of us making this a remainder like we would a traditional division problem, when we're doing fractions, the remainder becomes your new numerator, and the denominator still remains your denominator. So the final answer for this problem is 1 and 9/10. Instead of us making this a remainder like we would a traditional division problem, 1 and 9/10. When we're doing fractions, the remainder becomes your new numerator. So the only thing about doing the adding with the fractions, with the unlike denominators or subtracting, is that it has several steps, and that's what confuses some of the students. It gets them a little confused. Sometimes they get a little frustrated, but nonetheless, just take your time. Make sure you find your least common denominator. Work the problem through. If you happen to have an improper fraction, then you do your division, and that's how you get the answer. So I hope this helped. I will be back on tomorrow around the same time doing some more math, possibly some more fractions or something else. So you all have an awesome day. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for sharing. Have a good day. Bye-bye. Then you do your division, and that's how you get the answer. So I hope this helped. I will be back on tomorrow around the same time doing some more math, possibly some more fractions or something else. So you all have an awesome day. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for sharing. Have a good day. Bye-bye.